Start. Here are the threats. Pawn takes pawn, check. Queen takes rook, check. Queen takes pawn, check. Queen takes pawn, check. Bishop takes pawn. Here are the checks. Pawn takes pawn, check. Queen to g7, check. Queen takes rook, check. Queen takes pawn, check. Queen takes pawn, check. Answer to this puzzle is pawn takes pawn, check. Rook takes pawn. Bishop to e6. Queen to b8, check. g3. One more. Puzzle position vulnerabilities are knight takes pawn, check. Knight takes pawn. Rook takes rook. The checks are knight takes pawn, check. Rook to h7, check. Solution to the puzzle is rook to f4. Queen to e7. Rook takes pawn, check. Queen takes rook. Knight takes queen. Next, threats in this position are rook takes knight. Bishop takes pawn, check. Bishop takes pawn. Checks in puzzle position are bishop takes pawn, check. Solution to the puzzle is f5. Knight takes pawn. Queen to h4. Knight to h6. King to b7. Pawn takes pawn. Rook takes knight. Next puzzle, threats in this position are rook takes rook. Pawn takes rook. Queen takes bishop. Queen takes pawn, check. Checks in this position are rook to h8, check. Queen takes pawn, check. Solution to the puzzle is rook takes rook. Queen takes rook. Pawn takes rook. Queen to e6. Rook to c1. Queen to e2, check. King to h1. Another one. The threats are pawn takes pawn. Bishop takes pawn. Bishop takes bishop, check. Checks in puzzle position are bishop takes bishop, check. Here is the solution to the puzzle. Pawn takes pawn. Queen to c1. Queen to f6. Rook to e1. Queen to h4, check. King to g1. Bishop takes bishop. King takes bishop. Queen to h3, check. King to g1. g3. Let's see the next puzzle. The threats are queen takes pawn. Queen takes pawn. Rook takes bishop. Rook takes bishop. Here are the checks. Queen to h6, check. Queen to e7, check. Queen to d8, check. The best move in puzzle position is king to g2. Knight takes pawn. Pawn takes knight. Next, the threats are knight takes bishop. Rook takes bishop. Queen takes pawn. There are no checks in this position. Here is the solution to the puzzle. Knight takes bishop. Knight takes knight. Bishop to d5. Queen to d3. Queen takes queen. Pawn takes queen. Rook takes knight. One more. The threats are bishop takes knight. Bishop takes pawn, check. Queen takes pawn. Checks in puzzle position are bishop takes pawn, check. Solution to the puzzle is bishop takes knight. Bishop to e6. Bishop takes bishop. Next, here are threats in puzzle position. Pawn takes bishop. Queen takes bishop, check. Queen takes rook, check. Here are checks in puzzle position. h5, check. Queen takes bishop, check. Queen to f5, check. Queen to g6, check. Queen takes rook, check. Queen to f3, check. Queen to g2, check. Queen to e2, check. Here is the solution to the puzzle. Queen to e2, check. King to h4. Knight to g6, check. King to g5. Queen to e5, check. Let's continue. Puzzle position vulnerabilities are queen takes knight, check. Bishop takes knight. Let us look at checks in puzzle position. Queen takes knight, check. Rook to a8, check. Rook to e8, check. The puzzle is solved using bishop takes knight. Pawn takes bishop. d5. Next puzzle, threats in this position are rook takes pawn, check. Queen takes pawn, check. Queen takes knight. The checks are rook takes pawn, check. Queen takes pawn, check. Queen to d1, check. Solution to the puzzle is queen to g5. g3. Queen takes rook, check. King to g2. Rook to g7. Next, threats in puzzle position are there are no threats in this position. There are no checks in this position. The puzzle is solved using King to E6, King to C7, A2, D7, promotes to Queen, Queen to A5, check. One more. Threats in this position are Bishop takes Knight, Knight takes Pawn, Queen takes Pawn. There are no checks in this position. The best move in puzzle position is Bishop takes Knight, Bishop takes Bishop, Knight takes Pawn, Queen to A5, Queen takes Queen, Knight takes Queen, Bishop takes Bishop, check, Rook takes Bishop, Knight takes Bishop. Let's see the next puzzle. The threats are Knight takes Pawn, check, Rook takes Pawn, Rook takes Bishop. The checks are Knight to E7, check, Knight takes Pawn, check. Here is the solution to the puzzle. Knight takes Pawn, Bishop takes Pawn, Knight takes Rook. Let's see the next puzzle. Let us look at threats in puzzle position. Queen takes Rook, check, Queen takes Pawn, check, Queen takes Pawn, Knight takes Pawn. Let us look at checks in puzzle position. Queen takes Rook, check, Queen takes Pawn, check, Rook to F8, check. The puzzle is solved using Rook to F4, Bishop takes Rook, Pawn takes Bishop, Rook to E7, Knight takes Pawn. Let us go to the next puzzle. Puzzle position vulnerabilities are Bishop takes Pawn, check, Pawn takes Pawn, Queen takes Knight. Here are checks in puzzle position. Bishop takes Pawn, check, Knight to F3, check. The puzzle is solved using Rook to H8, A5, Queen to H4, H3, Bishop takes Pawn, check, Rook takes Bishop, Queen takes Knight. Let us go to the next puzzle. The threats are Queen takes Queen, check. The checks are Queen takes Queen, check, Queen to E3, check, Queen to D3, check, Queen to C3, check. Answer to this puzzle is Queen takes Queen, check, King takes Queen, C5, King to F4, King to D5, A4, King to C4, A5, King to B5. Let's see the next puzzle. Threats in this position are Knight takes Pawn, check, Rook takes Bishop, Rook takes Pawn. Here are the checks. Knight to E7, check, Knight takes Pawn, check. Solution to the puzzle is Rook takes Bishop, Queen takes Rook, Queen to H2, Rook to E8, Rook to G1, Bishop takes Pawn, Bishop takes Bishop, Rook takes Bishop, Rook takes Queen. Let us go to the next puzzle. Threats in this position are King takes Pawn, Bishop takes Pawn, Bishop takes Pawn, check, Rook takes Knight, Queen takes Pawn, Queen takes Knight, Queen takes Pawn, check. Let us look at checks in puzzle position. Bishop takes Pawn, check, Queen takes Pawn, check. The puzzle is solved using Bishop takes Pawn, check, King to B1, H6, F6, Queen takes Knight. Next puzzle. Here are threats in puzzle position. There are no threats in this position. There are no checks in this position. The puzzle is solved using King to F5, Knight to D2, King to E6, Knight to C4, A4, A5, King to D5, Knight to E3, check, King to E4. Let's see the next puzzle. Threats in puzzle position are Bishop takes Bishop, Knight takes Pawn, Knight takes Pawn, Knight takes Pawn, Pawn takes Pawn. There are no checks in this position. Solution to the puzzle is Bishop takes Bishop, Queen takes Bishop, Pawn takes Pawn, Queen to G5, check, King to H7, King to H2, Rook to G8. One more. Let us look at threats in puzzle position. Queen takes Pawn, check, Queen takes Pawn, check, Queen takes Knight, Queen takes Pawn, Knight takes Pawn, Rook takes Pawn, check. Let us look at checks in puzzle position. Queen takes Pawn, check, Queen takes Pawn, check, Knight to F5, check, Knight to F5, check, Knight to H5, check, Rook takes Pawn, check. Solution to the puzzle is Queen takes pawn, check. f6. Queen to e7, check. Rook to f7. Queen to e4. f5. Queen to e5, check. Another puzzle. Let us look at threats in puzzle position. Knight takes pawn. King takes bishop. Rook takes pawn. Rook takes pawn. Here are checks in puzzle position. Queen to g1, check. Rook to d1, check. Rook to c2, check. Solution to the puzzle is rook to e2. King to b1. Queen to f2. Queen to b8, check. King takes bishop. Another puzzle. The threats are rook takes bishop, check. Queen takes pawn. The checks are rook to b6, check. Rook takes bishop, check. Queen to d5, check. Queen to e6, check. The best move in puzzle position is rook to b8. Rook to b1. Queen takes rook. Queen takes queen. Rook takes queen. Next puzzle. Here are the threats. Queen takes pawn. Queen takes pawn. Rook takes pawn, check. Here are the checks. Knight to f6, check. Rook takes pawn, check. The best move in puzzle position is queen takes pawn. Queen to e5. Rook to e1. Queen takes knight. Rook takes rook, check. Rook takes rook. Queen takes queen. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe.